Hello and welcome back. Today's lecture is going to be on the conclusion of the war in the Pacific, otherwise known as VJ Day, victory over Japan. The island hopping campaign has gotten underway, and we see that as the Allies are moving from island to island, getting closer to Japan, that the Japanese forces are really digging in. They're fighting essentially to the last man. There's, just it's not looking like the Japanese are going to be willing to surrender. The fighting in Iwo Jima and Okinawa in particular, is absolutely brutal. The Japanese, when they run out of bullets, they still won't surrender. They'll essentially bayonet charge machine guns, which is essentially committing suicide. And the Japanese soldiers are willing to do that because they believe that it will bring honor to their families. And we see that like a stereotypical version of that today in Hollywood and in the movies, where it's this sense of honor or whatever. It's a very real thing in Japan. If you heroically serve the emperor, that does bring honor to your family. And in Japan, that means that your young brother or sister or kid is going to get accepted into that elite school easier. There's going to be assistance for your parents to make sure that they get food after you're gone, and that they're well taken care of. And so it's not just honor, there's real world consequences for these young Japanese men to bring honor to their family. And so they're going to fight absolutely ferociously. And that's going to scare the Allies, right? The Americans, who are doing, we're doing the majority of the fighting in the Pacific, are starting to look at the cost of invading Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and they're starting to come up with estimates that if we actually invade Japan proper, the main islands, then we might have 35% casualties. And there are some people that are estimating that would mean 1 million American casualties to invade Japan. You're seeing in like Okinawa that like people and Iwo Jima, people are committing suicide rather than be civilians, not just soldiers. Civilians are committing suicide rather than fall under the control of the Americans, and somehow that might lead to helping the Americans. And so the Japanese people would rather commit suicide. And so the Americans are really starting to become concerned about the next stage of the war against Japan. And it's not just the fighting on land that's scaring Americans. That's terrible, but it's also the kamikaze pilots that are terrifying Americans. And again, because it's showing how ferocious the Japanese people are going to be willing to fight. And so like we have talked about in previous lectures, the Japanese are running out of trained pilots, but they have plenty of planes. And so the Japanese military command comes up with the solution of the problem. What do you do when you don't have enough pilots? Well, but you have plenty of planes. Well, you take a young man who's willing to die to bring honor to the emperor, to Japan, and to his family, and you teach him essentially how to take off. That's the easy part of flying, and to aim, right? And so, the hardest part of flying is, and why you need a trained pilot, is landing and, how to maneuver in a dogfight. Well, these kamikaze pilots won't be needing to do that. They're essentially suicide bombers. And so they take these planes, they fill them up with explosives, they put a kamikaze pilot, which means divine wind, and they send them off and tell them to, find an American ship and just ram into it, committing suicide essentially, and causing as much damage as you can. That's terrifying for these American sailors, but the American military command as well, because it's one more example of, man, these guys aren't going to quit. Right, they're just digging in and fighting more ferociously. Now, for the sailors on these ships, it's terrifying too, because if a German pilot is attacking your battleship, you can defend yourself much easier, because that German pilot's probably going to want to survive, right? He doesn't want to die. And so, you on an American ship, you can, get in one of the guns and start firing at that pilot. And if you put enough bullets in the air, you'll scare that pilot away and he'll fly away. You don't have to actually kill the pilot. You don't have to blow up the plane. You could just damage the plane enough that the pilot realizes, I'm not going to be successful here. And that German pilot goes home. Well, you can't do that with a kamikaze pilot, right? He's not trying to survive. And so you can't just damage the plane, or you can't just scare the pilot, or you can't just make it apparent that he's not going to survive this, because he doesn't plan on surviving it anyway. You actually have to kill the pilot, and you can't just kill the pilot at the last second. You've got to kill him while he's far enough away that when he dies, he slumps over and the plane ends up missing your ship. And so it's much more difficult to defend against these kamikaze pilots than it would be regular pilots. And so it's got this terrifying psychological impact on American soldiers, and the American military command, really starts to freak out about what these casualties might end up looking like at the end of the day. Now, we're not just talking about invading Japan. We have also, by this point, started a blockade of Japan, and because we have taken Iwo Jima and Okinawa, we are bombing Japan as well with traditional bombs. Neither of those two things seem to be working either. The blockade is wildly successful, don't get me wrong. The Japanese people are starving, but there's no indication that they're actually talking about surrender. In the diplomatic circles, there is some evidence that some diplomats were thinking, man, we got to surrender here. But nobody in the military command structure is talking about it. And they're the ones that are in charge, in absolute charge, right? It's the military command structure and Emperor Hirohito, they're calling all the shots here. And nobody's talking about surrender, even though this blockade is working and the bombing campaign is incredibly successful. And we know, the firebombing of Tokyo is going to kill more people than the nuclear attack at Hiroshima. And so, that's significant. And they're still not talking about surrendering. And so, this is, FDR and, later Truman are kind of at their wits' end about, what are we going to do with Japan? How are we going to actually defeat the Japanese? Well, then comes, the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. The atomic bomb will be the answer to this problem of what do we do about Japan. The atomic bomb was developed by a bunch of physicists and others, a bunch of scientists, I should say, that took part in the Manhattan Project. The Americans are developing a bomb, an atomic bomb. The Germans were developing an atomic bomb as well. The British actually were in the beginning stages a part of the Manhattan Project, but then eventually it essentially became just an American product. Now, so when the project is first developed, it really is a race to see who can get to the atomic bomb first. Now, FDR starts this project and with the initial intention of potentially using a bomb against Germany. And, when we find out that Germany's trying to develop a bomb, it becomes a pretty stressful situation because, imagine if Hitler had a nuclear weapon, do you think he'd use it? Of course, right? And so, we definitely want to make sure we get this before he does. Now, we know that Hitler and the Nazis never really got that close to getting a nuclear weapon. They were pursuing an idea of using heavy water to make an atomic bomb. You actually can do that. As a matter of fact, atomic bombs have been made that way subsequently, but the technology is just way too far off. And so the Germans are attempting to build a nuclear weapon in a way that's just not possible with the technology of the times. And so, there was never really a threat that the Nazis would get a nuclear weapon. The Americans, on the other hand, are secretly developing nuclear weapons, and the project is going to be head up by this guy right here, which is Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, one of the most famous physicists in his day. He's also going to be helped by Einstein, Enrique Fermi, Niels Bohr, and other famous physicists that are German refugees. Right, a lot of these guys are Jews that were actually able to escape the Nazis, and they're helping to develop this nuclear weapon. Now, it's really scary while they're developing it. They don't know how powerful the bomb's going to be. There are some people that believe that the bomb might actually, when they explode it, might actually catch the atmosphere on fire, and it might be the end of life as we know it on this planet. That's not a real serious concern by most of these guys. Otherwise they wouldn't have done it. But there were some thought to that anyway. And so the atomic bomb does eventually get developed. It is much more explosive and powerful than most people thought it was going to be. Not the ones that thought it was going to light the atmosphere on fire, but and we developed two of them. As a matter of fact, we developed two working bombs that we're going to be able to have available to us to use in this war. By this time, Germany's out of the picture. We've defeated Germany. And, even though initially FDR was thinking about dropping a nuke on Germany, that kind of goes out the window, because the idea of dropping a nuke in Europe that we have such close ties to, economic ties, cultural ties, it just probably wasn't going to actually happen. The odds of us dropping a nuke on Germany was slim. The next thing that happens is FDR dies. And so when FDR dies, his vice president takes over, and that is Harry Truman. Harry Truman has no idea about the development of nuclear weapons. So when he steps into becoming the president, he's finding out about this thing just as anybody else would have, right? I mean, just knows nothing about the bomb, and he's informed, and it's going to be up to Truman to decide what to do, to use the bomb, not use the bomb. If you're going to use the bomb, how are you going to use it? Where are you going to drop it? How much time in between the two bombs are you going to drop the nukes? And so he's got kind of really tough decisions to make right as soon as he steps into becoming president. Now, he will ultimately decide to drop a nuke on Japan, because the predictions of the numbers of dead for invading Japan are just so astronomically high. And so he decides to drop a nuke, and then he goes to the Potsdam Conference with Churchill and Joseph Stalin. And while he's at Potsdam, he's going to tell Winston Churchill, I have a nuclear weapon. We know this is a game changer. It can wipe out the majority of a city. One bomb can just wipe out the majority of a city. The one that we drop on Hiroshima takes out 60% of the city, just evaporates it. And the destruction is wider than that even. Right? And so he tells Churchill all about it. And Then he goes to talk to Stalin. And when he talks to Stalin, he essentially glosses it over. He says, hey, we have a new weapon. We're going to use it soon. And that's pretty much it. Now, Stalin doesn't act shocked here. He actually knows that the United States was developing a nuke. He's got spies in America that have told him about it. But he is going to be upset that it was just glossed over. He's going to be upset for a couple of reasons. The first reason, it's just more evidence in Stalin's mind that America's not a true friend because we're keeping this weapon from him and we're not being fully honest about it and how much of a game changer it is. And the other thing is he's upset because he's starting to wonder, well, how long have you had it? And why didn't you use it against Germany when, the Soviet Union was fighting and we were fighting and dying and we could have used that help? And so Stalin's always in the back of his mind got this idea that, the West is really out to get him and they're not really helping him as much as they could. And so Stalin's gonna be upset about it. Now, when we talk about Truman making the decision to drop the bomb on Japan, everybody kind of talks about, the projected casualties, and it could be up to 1 million. Probably wouldn't have been 1 million. I think most people say it's, 600,000 to 1 million. But either way, that's a whole lot of people, right? And so, everybody talks about that when talking about how Truman justifies dropping the bomb. But he doesn't just do it to save American lives. He does it for another reason, too. He's going to do it to contain Joseph Stalin. It is clear by this point that Joseph Stalin is going to hold on to Eastern Europe, that he's not going to give that back. All the area that he liberated from Germany that used to be like Poland and Czechoslovakia and those areas, he's going to keep all that and not give it back. And so there's really nothing that anybody can do about it. He's got his soldiers there, but it's pretty clear that he wants to continue to expand. And to stop that expansion, America would have to keep massive amounts of troops in Europe to hold Stalin back because it's been fighting for too long. It can't defend itself. And so when Truman drops the bombs, he essentially sends a signal to Joseph Stalin, like, back off the rest of Europe. I don't have to keep millions of troops in Europe to hold you at bay. I've got these bombs that can do the job for America, right? And so we don't have to keep a large standing army in Europe to deter Stalin from taking over Europe because we have these bombs. So he wants to show off the destructive power of these bombs to keep Joseph Stalin at bay. So the first bomb will be dropped on Hiroshima. The bomb's nickname is Little Boy. It will be dropped by the airplane known as the Enola Gay. This bomb is going to explode about 2,000 feet above Hiroshima. The reason for that is it expands its explosive power. You blow it up above the ground, and the explosive force just shoots down, and then the fireball actually reverberates and kind of like bounces up and down and just smashes everything under it. The explosion is absolutely devastating. It's going to send a mushroom cloud. We'll take a look at a picture of a mushroom cloud here in a minute, to an altitude of 55,000 feet in the air. Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. It's absolutely massive. And it's going to kill somewhere between 80 and 130,000 people, are what the estimates are there for the number of people killed. And so this bomb is made out of uranium. It's actually the weaker of the two. And when we drop the bomb, all of a sudden now, Truman is like waiting to hear from Japan. Are they going to finally surrender? What's going on? And we don't hear anything. There's two reasons for this. All of the reports of the bomb haven't gotten to all the people that need to get the reports of the bomb yet. And so there's confusion about how massive this explosion actually was, and what was it, one bomb, was it not? The people at the very top, generally they know some game-changing bomb has been used, but there is still some confusion there. But what we do know subsequently is that even after the military command knows that we have nukes and that we're willing to use them, there's still no legitimate talk of surrendering. There's just not. There's this belief that the military command of Japan wants to go out in a blaze of glory, and they're willing to ride it out. And so, it's crazy. And so Truman gets criticized because after he drops the first bomb, and you can see how absolutely devastating this bomb is, he only waits 48 hours before he drops the next bomb. And so he'll be criticized by a lot of people for saying essentially, you don't have to drop the second bomb, you don't have to drop it, you give them more time, they're going to surrender. There's really no historical evidence that the military command at this point was willing to surrender. So Truman is going to decide to drop the second bomb, known as Fat Man. Fat Man is plutonium. This bomb is actually much more devastating, even though it does less damage. It's going to be dropped over Nagasaki. There's less damage to Nagasaki because of the geography of Nagasaki. It's like rounded by hills, and so it's going to contain the blast a little bit more. Kills about 35,000 people at Nagasaki, so it's still very, very devastating. And Truman's taking a shot here. Remember, he's going to lead people to believe we have more nukes than we actually have, but this is it. He's using up the arsenal here. And so he does drop the second bomb. When he drops the second bomb, again, this one is massively devastating, just obscene destructive power. After he drops this bomb, Hirohito calls his war council. When he calls his war council, again, the military advisors are at this point not fully on board with surrendering. There's actually a tie within his war council. And now, generally speaking, and I say generally speaking, historically speaking, the emperor who attends these councils doesn't speak in them. He's the god emperor, like literally the Japanese believe he's a god, not an immortal god, but a living god on earth. And so his voice is too pure for the council. When the council can't break the tie, Hirohito takes the historic step of voicing his opinion and breaking the tie and announcing that he's going to surrender. He'll then take it a step further and get on the radio and address the Japanese people and essentially tell the Japanese, there are some graphic images, by the way, so if you're sensitive to that, it's time to stop the YouTube video now. He gets Hirohito gets onto the radio, addresses the Japanese public, and essentially tells them that the war is over. Doesn't actually say the word surrender. Honor won't allow him to do that. Now, remember, the Americans required an unconditional surrender, and so the Japanese offer up a surrender, but they will ask for one exception to that unconditional surrender. They're going to ask that the emperor is going to remain in place, and they're hoping that the Americans will accept that. And so when the Japanese come to the Americans and say, we will accept surrender, but we would like to keep the emperor, Truman actually is really smart here and says, done deal. And what we recognize is the Japanese people themselves would not accept any kind of treaty that didn't allow the emperor to remain in place. And so Truman is going to allow Hirohito to remain the emperor. They're just going to take away all of his power and make him essentially a figurehead, just kind of the symbolic head of the Japanese people. And so he will be allowed to continue his reign just in a symbolic state. August 14th, Truman will announce an end to hostility, but the war is technically not over yet. Japan officially surrenders, after the signing of the treaty on the USS Missouri. It's at this point that the Allies put General Douglas MacArthur in charge of Japan. And so, I've been very critical of Douglas MacArthur. He wasn't prepared in the Philippines, and wait until we get to the lectures on Korea. He makes huge mistakes there. But what he does in Japan is actually really, truly great. He works really well with the Japanese people. He helps write their constitution and, establishes a very democratic society and rebuilds their economy and just does a phenomenal job with the Japanese. So much so, I mean, think about it, right? I mean, in the 1940s, Japan was our mortal enemy, and today in 2020 they are one of our greatest allies and one of our best friends. And it's because General MacArthur and the American government in general do such a good job rebuilding Japan. And credit to the Japanese people too. The Japanese people, they want to be a great people and a great country, and they really truly are. And they look around and they say, look, we got beat. We tried it our way and America beat us. And so if we want to be great, we need to make some changes. And so they really truly embrace democracy, and they really truly embrace capitalism. And so they become one of the strongest democracies and one of the strongest capitalist economies in the world subsequently. So VJ Day, or Victory Over Japan, actually is going to come on September 2nd, 1945, when the Japanese officially surrender. There you go. There you have it. We have now officially ended World War II. Thank you very much for your time. I will see you again shortly.